When gods shaped the world from words. Imagine a time before time, when the world existed only in the minds of the gods, when darkness covered everything like a vast ocean of possibility, and when the first act of creation was not a single divine word but a conversation between cosmic forces about what reality should become. This is where we begin with the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, one of humanity's most profound creation myths, and a story that challenges everything you think you know about how universes begin and heroes are born. But here's what makes this ancient text absolutely revolutionary. It doesn't just tell us how the world was made. It reveals the failed attempts, the divine experiments that went wrong, and most importantly, it shows us gods who learn from their mistakes and refine their vision of creation through trial and error, collaboration, and debate. This isn't the story of perfect deities creating a finished universe in a single moment of divine inspiration. This is the story of creation as an ongoing process, where even the gods must work together to figure out what they're trying to accomplish. From whichever culture you come from, you've probably heard creation stories where a single god speaks reality into existence or shapes humanity from clay with divine perfection. But what if creation was messier than that? What if the gods had to experiment, make mistakes, and try multiple times before getting things right? What does that tell us about the nature of perfection, creativity, and the relationship between failure and ultimate success? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're about to journey into the heart of Mayan cosmology, to a universe where gods debate the best materials for making humans, where the first people were too perfect and had to be limited so they wouldn't rival their creators, and where two brothers would descend into the underworld to face the lords of death in ball games that would determine the fate of all humanity. This is creation mythology at its most sophisticated, hero's journey at its most profound, and storytelling at its most imaginatively ambitious. The Council of Creation. The beginning was the silence and the ripple, the vast, calm waters that stretched without boundary or interruption under a sky that held no sun, no moon, no stars, nothing but the potential for everything that might one day exist. But within this apparent emptiness, consciousness stirred. Not the consciousness of a single supreme being, but the collective awareness of multiple divine entities, each contributing their voice to a cosmic conversation about what creation should become. The heart of sky, composed of three aspects known as newborn thunderbolt, raw thunderbolt, and hurricane, represented the active, dynamic forces of creation, the energies that would shape and move and give life to whatever emerged from divine planning. Sovereign plumed serpent embodied wisdom, the careful consideration of consequences, the understanding that creation required not just power, but intelligence, not just action, but reflection. Their first conversation established the philosophical foundation of everything that would follow: creation through consensus rather than decree, reality shaped by dialogue rather than monologue, a universe built on the principle that even gods benefit from collaboration and mutual consultation when undertaking projects of cosmic significance. "Let it be this way," they said to each other, not commanding reality into existence, but proposing possibilities, testing ideas, refining concepts through the kind of careful deliberation that produces lasting results rather than hasty solutions. Think on it. In the darkness, in the night, let there be light. Let there be dawn. Let there be humanity to provide for us, to nurture us, to remember us, and call upon our names. But their first attempt at creating a world revealed the complexity of translating divine concepts into physical reality. When they spoke the word earth, land rose from the primordial waters, mountains thrust toward the sky, valleys carved themselves into the newly formed terrain, and rivers began to flow toward the sea. The basic structure of reality responded perfectly to their intentions, creating a foundation capable of supporting whatever life they chose to place upon it. The gods' decision to populate this new earth with animals represented their understanding. That creation required not just landscape, but living beings to inhabit and animate the world they were building. But as they watched the animals they had made, the deer and birds, the pumas and jaguars, the serpents and insects, they realized that something essential was missing from their creation. The animals could not speak their names, could not offer praise or remembrance, could not participate in the kind of conscious relationship with divinity that the gods desired. They were perfect as animals, but insufficient as companions for beings whose existence derived meaning from being acknowledged, honored, and remembered by their creatures. Here's something profound about this moment that applies to creative processes. In every culture and time period, the gods discover that getting the technical details right isn't enough if you haven't achieved your deeper purpose. Whether you're building a business, raising a family, creating art, or pursuing any meaningful goal, you can execute all the mechanical steps perfectly and still miss the essential element that makes the whole endeavor worthwhile. What do you think separates technical success from meaningful achievement? Can you think of examples where getting the process right wasn't enough to create real satisfaction or lasting value? This realization led to their first attempt at creating beings capable of speech, memory, and spiritual awareness. Humans who could serve not as slaves, but as conscious partners in maintaining the relationship between divine and mortal realms. But the materials they chose for this initial experiment would prove problematic in ways that revealed the complexity of balancing different attributes in a single creation. Their first humans were shaped from mud, formed with careful attention, to creating bodies that could walk upright, hands that could work and build, faces that could express emotion and intelligence. But mud, while pliable and easy to work with, lacked the structural integrity necessary for beings intended to last and thrive and reproduce across generations. When the rains came, the mud people dissolved. When heat stressed their bodies, they cracked and crumbled. Their speech was unclear, their movements were unstable, and their thoughts seemed cloudy and unfocused, as if the material limitations of their construction affected not just their physical capabilities, but their mental and spiritual faculties as well. The gods' recognition that this first attempt had failed marked a crucial moment in their understanding of the creative process. They weren't dealing with simple problems that could be solved through minor adjustments. They were learning that creating conscious beings required balancing multiple complex requirements: durability and flexibility, strength and sensitivity, independence and loyalty, intelligence and humility. The dissolution of the mud people wasn't seen as a catastrophic failure, but as valuable data in an ongoing experiment, evidence that would inform their next attempt and bring them closer to achieving their ultimate goal of creating beings worthy of serving as partners in the cosmic order they were establishing. But before they could attempt a second creation of humanity, they would discover that the universe they were building contained forces and entities that had their own opinions about how creation should proceed, and that the path from divine intention to realized creation would prove far more challenging and complex than even these wise and powerful gods had initially imagined. The wooden people and divine intervention. The gods' second attempt at creating humanity demonstrated their ability to learn from previous mistakes while revealing new challenges that emerged from solving earlier problems. Having concluded that mud was too fragile and impermanent for beings intended to serve as conscious partners in maintaining cosmic order, they turned to wood as a material that offered greater durability and structural integrity while remaining workable enough to shape into human forms. The wooden people represented a significant improvement over their mud predecessors in almost every measurable way. They could walk without dissolving, speak without their voices becoming muddy and unclear, work with their hands without fear of structural collapse, and reproduce to create communities and cultures that persisted across generations. They built houses, developed tools, established social relationships, and created the fundamental structures of civilization that the gods had envisioned as necessary for beings capable of providing proper worship and remembrance. But as the gods observed their wooden creations over time, they began to notice disturbing patterns that revealed the limitations of this second attempt at human creation. The wooden people were mechanically functional, but spiritually empty, technically capable, but emotionally hollow, able to perform all the outward behaviors of conscious beings without possessing the inner life that would make those behaviors meaningful. Most troubling of all, the wooden people failed to demonstrate the quality that the gods most desired in their human partners: the capacity for genuine gratitude, remembrance, and spiritual connection. They went through the motions of worship without feeling, offered sacrifices without appreciation for divine blessings, and called upon divine names without understanding the relationship those names represented. Their hearts, carved from wood, like the rest of their bodies, could not feel the deep connection to their creators that would transform mechanical obedience into conscious devotion, empty ritual into meaningful worship, automatic behavior into chosen relationship. They were, in essence, sophisticated automatons that looked and acted like humans without possessing human souls. The gods' growing dissatisfaction with the wooden people reflected their understanding that external behavior, no matter how correct or consistent, could never substitute for internal authenticity and genuine spiritual awareness. Creating beings that could perform the actions of worship was meaningless if those beings lacked the capacity to experience the emotions and understanding that made worship valuable to both worshiper and deity. But before the gods could decide how to address the shortcomings of their wooden creation, the universe itself began to rebel against these hollow humans in ways that revealed the interconnectedness of all creation and the importance of maintaining proper relationships not just between humans and gods, but between humans and all the other beings that shared the world with them. The uprising that destroyed the wooden people began with the very tools and objects they had created to serve their needs and make their lives more comfortable and productive. Grinding stones rose up to crush the faces that had never shown proper gratitude for the corn they had processed. Cooking pots burned the hands that had never appreciated the meals they had prepared. Dogs and turkeys turned against the masters, who had treated them as mere property rather than fellow creatures, deserving respect and consideration. Here's what I find absolutely brilliant about this part of the story. It shows us that how we treat the non-human world reflects who we are as conscious beings, and that authentic spirituality requires recognizing our connections to everything around us, not just to abstract divine forces. Whether it's environmental destruction in modern times or simply taking for granted the tools and creatures that make our lives possible, the wooden people's fate reminds us that consciousness means acknowledging our relationships and responsibilities. What do you think this ancient wisdom tells us about how we should interact with our tools, our environment, and the other living beings we depend on? How might this apply to our modern relationship with technology and nature? The destruction of the wooden people was both complete and symbolic, as their bodies were broken apart and their spirits scattered to become the monkeys that still inhabit the forests. A reminder that intelligence without wisdom, capability without consciousness, and function without feeling ultimately lead to spiritual emptiness and cosmic rejection. But even as the wooden people met their fate, the seeds of true humanity were already growing in the form of beings who would eventually become the first real humans, made from materials that could support not just physical life, but spiritual awareness, emotional depth, and genuine relationship with the divine forces that had labored so long and learned so much in their quest to create worthy partners in the ongoing work of maintaining cosmic order. The gods' third attempt at human creation would incorporate everything they had learned from their previous experiments while introducing entirely new approaches to the fundamental question of what materials could best support the kind of consciousness they sought to nurture in their most important creations. But before that final and successful creation could take place, The story would shift to focus on events that were unfolding in the human realm, events involving two remarkable brothers whose adventures would demonstrate the qualities that the gods most wanted to see in their human partners and whose ultimate triumph would help establish the cosmic order that would make authentic human-divine relationship possible. The stage was being set for the greatest hero's journey in all of Mesoamerican literature, an adventure that would take place in the underworld itself and would pit human courage, intelligence, and teamwork against the lords of death in contests that would determine not just individual survival, but the future possibility of meaningful life for all humanity. These were the Hero Twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, and their story would prove that the gods' quest for worthy human partners was not in vain, that beings capable of genuine heroism, authentic spiritual awareness, and conscious relationship with divine forces could indeed exist and thrive and serve as examples for all future generations of what humanity at its best could become. The first heroes and the call of destiny. Before the Hero Twins, who would become legends throughout the Mayan world, there lived their father Hunahpu and his brother Hunahpu, men who possessed many admirable qualities, but whose story would serve as both inspiration and cautionary tale for the greater heroes who would follow in their footsteps. These first heroes were passionate players of the ball game that held deep sacred significance throughout Mesoamerican culture, representing the eternal struggle between opposing forces, the movement of celestial bodies, and the ongoing battle between life and death that defined cosmic order. Every day, the brothers would play their ball game with such enthusiasm and skill that the sound of the rubber ball striking the court echoed throughout the three levels of creation: the surface world where humans lived, the sky realm where gods dwelt, and most problematically, the underworld domain of Xibalba, where the lords of death ruled over the spirits of the deceased and maintained the balance between life and mortality. The lords of death, led by One Death and Seven Death, supported by deputies with names like Scab Stripper, Blood Gatherer, Demon of Woe, Demon of Pus, Bone Scepter, Skull Scepter, Jaundice Master, and Bloody Claws, had grown increasingly irritated by the constant noise from above that disrupted their solemn dominion and challenged their authority over the boundaries between life and death. "Who are these beings who dare to make such noise above our heads?" demanded One Death, his voice carrying the cold authority of ultimate mortality. "Do they not understand that our realm demands respect, that the domain of death requires proper reverence, that those who live should remember their ultimate destination and conduct themselves with appropriate humility?" The decision to summon the brothers to Xibalba for a ball game challenge represented more than mere irritation at noise pollution. It was a test of whether living beings understood and respected the proper cosmic order, whether humans recognized their place in the greater scheme of creation, and whether mortality could triumph over the presumption and pride that seemed to characterize those who had not yet confronted their own inevitable deaths. Hunahpu and Hunahpu's acceptance of this supernatural summons demonstrated the courage and competitive spirit that would later characterize their more successful descendants. But their approach to the challenges they would face in Xibalba revealed crucial limitations that would lead to their defeat and death, but would also provide essential lessons for the heroes who would eventually avenge them. The journey to Xibalba took the brothers through landscapes that became increasingly alien and threatening as they moved from the familiar surface world toward the realm of death itself. They crossed rivers of scorpions, navigated canyons filled with razor-sharp obsidian, and passed through regions where the very air seemed thick with malevolent intent and supernatural danger. But the most dangerous obstacles they faced were not physical challenges that could be overcome through strength or skill, but psychological and spiritual tests that required wisdom, humility, and deep understanding of the nature of death and the proper relationship between mortal and immortal realms. The House of Darkness, where they were required to spend their first night in Xibalba, tested their ability to maintain light and hope in the face of overwhelming despair and hopelessness. They were given torches and cigars that they were told must burn throughout the night, but must also be returned in the morning completely unconsumed. An impossible task that revealed the Lords of Death's mastery of paradox and contradiction as weapons against the living. Here's something that strikes me as incredibly relevant to modern life. The brothers faced challenges that couldn't be solved through conventional means. Tests that required thinking outside normal parameters and understanding that the rules of the underworld were fundamentally different from those of the surface world. We all encounter situations where our usual strategies don't work, where success requires adapting to entirely different rules and expectations. What do you think separates people who can adapt to radically different circumstances from those who keep trying the same approaches even when they're clearly not working? How do we learn to recognize when we need to completely change our strategies? The failure of Hunhunappu and Vucubhunappu to solve the riddle of the burning but unconsumed torches marked them for defeat in the ball games that followed. Contests where the Lords of Death demonstrated their mastery not just of athletic skill, but of supernatural powers that made fair competition impossible for mortal opponents operating under normal physical laws. Their deaths, however, were not meaningless failures, but necessary sacrifices that would provide crucial intelligence and motivation for the heroes who would eventually succeed where they had failed. Hunhunappu's severed head, hung in a calabash tree as a trophy of the Lords of Death's victory, retained enough spiritual power to father the children who would become the Hero Twins and inherit not just their father's courage and athletic ability, but the wisdom that comes from understanding previous failures and learning from them. The Maiden Blood. Woman's encounter with Hunhunappu's head in the calabash tree represented a moment of miraculous conception that transcended normal biological processes and connected the realm of the dead with the world of the living in ways that would prove crucial to the ultimate triumph of life over death, consciousness over oblivion, hope over despair. When Hunhunappu's skull spoke to her and miraculously impregnated her with his spiritual essence, the encounter established a bloodline that would combine the best qualities of both mortal and immortal realms while avoiding the limitations that had doomed the previous generation of heroes to defeat at the hands of death's representatives. Blood. Woman's subsequent journey from Xibalba to the surface world, carrying within her womb the future champions who would eventually redeem their father's defeat and restore proper balance between life and death, set the stage for the birth of heroes whose adventures would become the most celebrated and influential in all of Mesoamerican literature. The Hero Twins, Hunappu and Xbalanque, would inherit their father's courage and skill, but would also possess the additional wisdom that comes from growing up with knowledge of previous failures, understanding of their enemies' tactics, and most importantly, a deep partnership with each other that would enable them to accomplish together what individual heroes had failed to achieve alone. Their story would demonstrate that the gods' search for worthy human partners was not in vain, that beings capable of genuine heroism, authentic spiritual development, and conscious relationship with divine forces could indeed exist and thrive and serve as examples for all future generations of what humanity at its best could become. The Hero Twins rise to greatness. The birth of Hunappu and Xbalanque marked the beginning of a new chapter in the cosmic struggle between life and death, order and chaos, conscious heroism and blind destruction. But their path to legendary status would require them to first prove themselves in the ordinary world of human relationships and everyday challenges before they could take on the supernatural enemies that had defeated their father and uncle. Blood Woman's arrival in the surface world, pregnant with the future heroes, created immediate conflicts with Hunhunappu's existing family. His mother and his other sons, one monkey and one artisan, who had established themselves as the premier artists and intellectuals of their generation. The tension between the old and new generations reflected deeper questions about inheritance, legacy, and the relationship between established tradition and necessary innovation. One monkey and one artisan represented the heights of cultural achievement that were possible within existing frameworks. They were master painters, sculptors, singers, and flute players whose artistic creations brought beauty and meaning to human life, and whose intellectual accomplishments had earned them recognition throughout the known world. But their pride in these achievements and their resentment of the new brothers who threatened their position revealed limitations that would ultimately prevent them from achieving the kind of heroism that true leadership required. The Hero Twins. Childhood was marked by conflicts that tested not only their individual abilities, but their capacity for working together as a team, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses, and coordinating their efforts toward common goals rather than competing for individual recognition and glory. Their treatment by their older half-brothers, who saw them as threats to be eliminated rather than allies to be nurtured, taught them essential lessons about loyalty, the importance of protecting those who depend on you, and the difference between leadership that serves the community and dominance that serves only personal ambition. The transformation of one monkey and one artisan into actual monkeys, accomplished through the Hero Twins' superior understanding of both practical skills and supernatural powers, represented not revenge, but cosmic justice. Beings whose pride had prevented them from recognizing their proper place in the cosmic order were reduced to a status that reflected their spiritual limitations rather than their technical abilities. But this early triumph also revealed the Hero Twins' understanding of mercy and the proper use of power. Rather than destroying their defeated half-brothers, they transformed them into creatures that could continue to contribute to the world's beauty and meaning while being prevented from causing further harm through their pride and selfishness. Here's what makes this dynamic so universally relevant. We all encounter people who have great talents, but whose character flaws prevent them from using those talents constructively. Whether it's in families, workplaces, or communities, the challenge of dealing with gifted individuals who lack wisdom or humility is something every generation faces. The Hero Twins' solution, removing their ability to cause harm while preserving their ability to contribute positively, offers a model for how to address toxic behavior without resorting to unnecessarily destructive measures. What are some examples from your experience of people finding constructive ways to deal with talented but problematic individuals? The Hero Twins' mastery of the ball game that had been their father's passion demonstrated their inheritance of his athletic abilities while showing that they had learned from his mistakes and developed superior strategies for dealing with supernatural opponents. Their play was characterized not just by individual skill but by perfect coordination, mutual support, and tactical awareness that made them far more formidable as a team than either could have been alone. Their supernatural abilities, Hunahpu's mastery of the sun's power and Xbalank's command of jaguar strength and stealth, complemented each other perfectly and represented the kind of balanced partnership that could accomplish goals beyond the reach of individual heroes, no matter how skilled or courageous they might be. When the noise of their ball games once again attracted the attention of the Lords of Death in Xibalba, the Hero Twins understood that this summons represented not just a challenge to their athletic abilities, but a chance to redeem their father's defeat, restore proper balance between life and death, and demonstrate that human beings could indeed serve as worthy partners for the gods in maintaining cosmic order. Their acceptance of the challenge to descend into Xibalba and face the Lords of Death in their own domain showed courage that matched their father's, but was tempered by wisdom, preparation, and mutual support that would prove crucial in overcoming obstacles that had defeated previous heroes. The preparations they made before descending to the underworld revealed their understanding that success would require not just courage and skill, but intelligence, adaptability, and the kind of thorough planning that takes into account every possible contingency and prepares responses for challenges that might arise unexpectedly. Most importantly, they understood that their mission involved more than personal victory or family honor. They were fighting for the future possibility of authentic human-divine relationship, for the right of conscious beings to exist without being dominated by the forces of death and despair, and for the principle that life, consciousness, and hope could ultimately triumph over darkness, ignorance, and cosmic pessimism. The stage was set for the greatest adventure in all of Mayan literature, a journey into the heart of death itself that would test every quality the gods had sought in their human partners, and would determine whether the cosmic order they had labored to create could be sustained by beings worthy of serving as conscious participants in maintaining the balance between all opposing forces that shaped reality. Descent into the realm of death. The journey to Xibalba that had once defeated their father and uncle became for the Hero Twins an opportunity to demonstrate everything they had learned about preparation, teamwork, and the importance of understanding your enemies before confronting them directly. Unlike their predecessors who had descended into the underworld with courage but insufficient knowledge, Hunahpu and Xbalanque approached their supernatural challenge with careful planning and tactical awareness that would prove crucial to their eventual success. Their first act before beginning the descent was to leave detailed instructions with a louse, a creature so small and seemingly insignificant that the Lords of Death would never suspect it of serving as a communication link between the surface world and the underworld. This messenger, along with a frog, a snake, and a hawk that would carry word of the twins' fate back to their grandmother, represented the kind of comprehensive contingency planning that separated true heroes from merely brave warriors. The path to Xibalba led through landscapes that challenged not just physical endurance but psychological resilience and spiritual strength. They crossed the River of Scorpions, where creatures that embodied concentrated pain and venomous hostility attacked anything that dared to pass through their domain. They navigated the River of Blood, where the very water spoke of violence and death, and tried to convince travelers that their mission was hopeless and their destination inevitable. But the Hero Twins had learned from their father's experience that the greatest dangers in Xibalba were not the obvious physical challenges, but the subtle psychological and spiritual tests designed to undermine confidence, create confusion, and trick visitors into making fatal mistakes through overconfidence, fear, or simple misunderstanding of the rules that govern this supernatural realm. When they reached the council place of Xibalba, where wooden mannequins sat beside the actual Lords of Death in identical poses, the twins avoided the trap that had embarrassed their father by using their supernatural senses to distinguish between real and artificial enemies. Their ability to correctly identify and greet 1 death and 7 death while ignoring the decoy figures demonstrated the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding that in supernatural realms, nothing is exactly what it appears to be, and success requires constant vigilance and careful observation. The great heated bench that was offered to them as an honor, but which was actually designed to burn and humiliate visitors, posed no challenge to beings who had inherited both human intelligence and supernatural abilities. They sat comfortably on the superheated stone while their hosts watched in growing amazement and concern, realizing that these new visitors possessed capabilities that their predecessors had lacked. But the real tests began with the House of Darkness, the same challenge that had defeated Hunahpu and Hunahpu. The twins were given torches and cigars that had to burn all night but be returned in the morning completely unconsumed, an impossible paradox that required thinking beyond normal physical laws and understanding that in Xibalba, success often meant finding creative solutions to contradictory requirements. Here's what I find so brilliant about their solution. Instead of trying to make the torches burn without being consumed, they replaced the flames with red macaw feathers that glowed, like fire in the darkness, and substituted fireflies for the glowing tips of the cigars. They understood that the challenge was about maintaining the appearance of burning while preserving the substance, about meeting the technical requirements while avoiding the spiritual trap. This kind of creative problem-solving, finding ways to satisfy impossible demands by reinterpreting the terms rather than accepting defeat, is something we all need in dealing with no-win situations. Can you think of times when you've had to find unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible problems? Their success in the House of Darkness was only the beginning of a series of increasingly difficult tests designed to break their spirit, undermine their partnership, or trick them into fatal mistakes. The House of Knives challenged them with blades that attacked of their own accord until the twins convinced the weapons that they would receive better offerings if they helped rather than hindered the heroes. The House of Cold threatened to freeze them solid until they created fires that burned without consuming fuel. The House of Jaguars was filled with predators that would have devoured normal humans, but recognized in Xbalanque a kindred spirit, and spared both brothers. Each challenge revealed different aspects of their heroic nature: intelligence, adaptability, supernatural abilities, and most importantly, their unshakable partnership that enabled them to support each other through trials that would have overwhelmed individual heroes regardless of their personal capabilities. The House of Fire tested their resistance to elemental destruction, while the House of Bats confronted them with creatures of death and darkness that could strip flesh from bone and souls from bodies with equal efficiency. But even in this most terrifying environment, surrounded by supernatural predators that embodied the essence of violent death, the Hero Twins maintained their composure and protected each other until they could find ways to neutralize or escape the threats they faced. When Hunahpu's head was severed by the killer bats, the crisis that threatened to end their mission instead became an opportunity to demonstrate the depth of their partnership and their mastery of supernatural abilities that transcended normal limitations. Xbalanque's successful effort to restore his brother's head using a squash as a temporary replacement showed that their bond was strong enough to overcome even apparent death, and that their understanding of life and death transcended normal human limitations. The ball games that followed these preliminary tests would represent the ultimate challenge. Contests where athletic skill, supernatural ability, and strategic thinking would determine not just their personal survival, but the future relationship between life and death, between human consciousness and the forces that sought to limit and control it. The Lords of Death had never faced opponents like the Hero Twins, beings who combined human intelligence with supernatural abilities, individual skill with perfect teamwork, and courage with wisdom gained from understanding previous failures and learning from them. The stage was set for competitions that would reshape the cosmic order and determine whether conscious beings could claim their rightful place as partners in maintaining universal balance rather than merely subjects to be dominated by forces beyond their control. The ultimate games and sacrificial triumph, the ball games that would determine the fate of all future relationships between life and death, between human consciousness and supernatural forces, between hope and despair, began with contests that seemed deceptively similar to normal athletic competitions, but which contained layers of meaning and consequence that extended far beyond simple victory or defeat in sporting events. The Lords of Death approached these games with supreme confidence, based on centuries of experience defeating mortal challengers, supernatural abilities that transcended normal physical laws, and home field advantage in a realm where they controlled every aspect of the environment and could manipulate the rules of competition to ensure their continued dominance over any beings foolish enough to challenge their authority. But the Hero Twins brought to these contests capabilities that no previous challengers had possessed. Not just individual skills, but perfect coordination. Not just courage, but wisdom gained from understanding their enemy's tactics. Not just supernatural abilities, but the strategic intelligence necessary to use those abilities effectively against opponents who had been perfecting their own powers for millennia. The first games revealed the complexity of competition in Xibalba, where the ball itself was a weapon designed to decapitate opponents, where the court was rigged with traps and obstacles that could kill unwary players, and where the very rules of play were designed to ensure that visiting challengers would face impossible odds and inevitable defeat. But instead of being intimidated by these challenges, the Hero Twins used them as opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of supernatural abilities and their understanding that success in Xibalba required thinking beyond normal limitations and finding creative solutions to problems that seemed to have no acceptable answers. When the Lords of Death demanded that the games be played with a ball made from human skull covered with leather, the twins countered by insisting that competition should use their own ball, one that embodied principles of fair play rather than predetermined victimization. When their opponents attempted to use supernatural powers to guarantee their victory, Hunahpu and Xbalanque responded with their own abilities while maintaining the kind of sportsmanlike conduct that proved their worthiness to serve as representatives of conscious, ethical beings. The games themselves became demonstrations of different approaches to power and competition. The Lords of Death relied on cheating, intimidation, and manipulation of circumstances to maintain their dominance, while the Hero Twins combined superior skill with ethical behavior and mutual support that made them not just more effective competitors, but worthier representatives of the principles they served. But even as they began to demonstrate their superiority in direct competition, the twins understood that ultimate victory would require more than simply defeating their enemies in ball games. The cosmic order that the Lords of Death represented was too deeply entrenched to be overthrown through athletic prowess alone, and lasting change would require a more fundamental transformation of the relationship between life and death than could be achieved through conventional triumph. Here's what makes their strategy so profound and relevant to every kind of conflict. They realize that sometimes you can't defeat a corrupt system by playing within its rules, even if you're better at the game than your opponents. Sometimes, real change requires accepting apparent defeat in order to expose the true nature of what you're fighting against and demonstrate alternative principles that can inspire others to demand better. Throughout history, the most effective reformers have often been those willing to suffer in order to reveal the injustices they opposed. What examples can you think of where people achieved lasting change by accepting short-term losses to expose long-term problems? The twins' decision to allow themselves to be killed, but only after establishing conditions that would enable them to return stronger than before, represented the most sophisticated understanding of sacrifice and renewal that appears anywhere in world literature. They weren't simply martyring themselves for abstract principles, but were implementing a complex strategy that would use their enemy's victory against them and transform apparent defeat into ultimate triumph. Their instructions for how their bodies should be disposed of, ground up and scattered in the river rather than buried or burned according to normal customs, reflected their understanding that resurrection would require complete dissolution followed by reconstitution according to entirely new principles that would enable them to return with enhanced abilities and deeper wisdom. The grinding of their bones and scattering of their remains in the river created the conditions for a rebirth that transcended normal biological processes and operated according to supernatural principles that would enable them to return as beings who had experienced death but were no longer subject to its limitations. When they reappeared as wandering entertainers whose magical abilities surpassed anything the Lords of Death had ever seen, they began the final phase of their campaign, using performance and demonstration to expose the fundamental weaknesses and contradictions in their enemies' approach to power, while positioning themselves to deliver the decisive blow when the moment was right. Their performances, killing and reviving each other, burning down houses and instantly rebuilding them, sacrificing animals and bringing them back to life, were not mere entertainment, but demonstrations of mastery over the very forces that the Lords of Death claimed to control exclusively. The growing amazement and envy of their supernatural audience created the psychological conditions necessary for the final confrontation, as beings who had never questioned their own supremacy began to desire abilities that seemed even greater than their own and to consider possibilities that would ultimately prove fatal to their continued dominance. When 1 death and 7 death demanded to be killed and revived as the ultimate demonstration of the entertainer's abilities, they were unknowingly requesting their own destruction by beings they had failed to recognize as the same heroes they thought they had permanently defeated. The Hero Twins' agreement to perform this ultimate sacrifice represented the culmination of their entire strategy, using their enemies' arrogance and desire for enhanced power to create the opportunity for decisive action that would permanently transform the relationship between life and death and establish new principles for cosmic order based on justice rather than arbitrary dominance. Victory over death and cosmic transformation. The moment when 1 death and 7 death lay slain by the very heroes they believed they had permanently destroyed marked not just a personal victory for the Hero Twins, but a fundamental transformation in the nature of cosmic order itself. For the first time in the history of Xibalba, the Lords of Death had been defeated by representatives of life and consciousness, proving that mortality need not mean subjugation to forces of despair and arbitrary destruction. But the Hero Twins' triumph was characterized by wisdom and restraint rather than vengeful destruction. When the remaining Lords of Xibalba cowered before them, expecting to be slaughtered as they had slaughtered countless heroes before, Hunahpu and Xbalanque demonstrated the magnanimity that separates true heroes from mere conquerors and established principles that would govern the new cosmic order they were creating through their victory. "Your day is finished," they declared to the surviving Lords of Death. "Your authority over the living is ended. No longer will you have the power to arbitrarily destroy human beings for your amusement or to satisfy your hunger for dominance over conscious life. From this day forward, death will serve its proper function as part of the natural order, but it will not be permitted to terrorize or torment those who deserve to live in peace and pursue their proper relationship with the divine forces that created them." The transformation they imposed upon Xibalba represented not the elimination of death, but its reformation according to principles of justice and cosmic balance. The Lords of Death would continue to exist and serve their necessary function in maintaining the cycle of life and mortality, but they would no longer be permitted to abuse their power or extend their influence beyond the bounds that proper cosmic order required. The tribute that would henceforth be paid to the Lords of Xibalba was carefully regulated to include only those who had forfeited their right to continued life through evil behavior: murderers, troublemakers, those who brought suffering to others through their actions, rather than innocent people who happened to catch the attention of death through bad luck or arbitrary divine displeasure. This reformation of death's role in cosmic order reflected the Hero Twins' understanding that sustainable victory required not the destruction of necessary institutions, but their transformation according to higher principles that served the common good rather than the narrow interests of those who held power within them. Here's what makes this resolution so sophisticated and relevant to every kind of social reform. The twins understood that you can't eliminate death or suffering from existence, but you can establish principles that prevent those forces from being used arbitrarily or unjustly. Throughout history, the most successful reforms have been those that channeled existing institutions toward better purposes rather than trying to destroy them completely. Whether it's reforming government, business, education, or any other system, lasting change usually comes from establishing better principles and accountability rather than trying to eliminate necessary functions entirely. What examples can you think of where reform worked better than revolution? Their decision to restore their father Hunahpu to life represented the completion of their family mission while demonstrating the ultimate power that consciousness and determination could wield over the forces that sought to limit human potential and spiritual development. But even this deeply personal victory was accomplished in a way that served larger principles rather than mere family loyalty or individual desire for reunion. The resurrection of Hunhunapu was not a simple reversal of death, but a demonstration that heroic sacrifice in service of worthy causes could transcend normal limitations and achieve forms of immortality that were based on spiritual accomplishment rather than mere biological persistence. Their father's return to life was conditional upon his continued service to cosmic order and his commitment to using his restored existence for purposes that served the common good rather than personal satisfaction. The establishment of their father as Lord of the Ball Court in the Sky created a new cosmic institution that would ensure the continued celebration of the principles the Hero Twins had fought to establish. Competition that was fair and meaningful. Games that tested character as well as skill, and athletic contests that strengthened communities rather than serving as excuses for violence or domination. But the most significant transformation that resulted from their victory was the change in cosmic order that made possible the successful creation of true humanity, beings made from materials that could support both physical life and spiritual consciousness. Creatures capable of serving as genuine partners to the gods in maintaining universal balance and harmony. The Hero Twins' ascension to become the sun and moon represented their permanent integration into the cosmic order they had fought to reform, ensuring that their principles would continue to influence the relationship between life and death, light and darkness, consciousness and oblivion for all future generations. As the sun, Hunahpu would provide the light and warmth necessary for life to flourish, while as the moon, Xbalanque would maintain the cycles and rhythms that governed the passage of time and the alternation between day and night, activity and rest, growth and reflection. Their placement in the heavens as permanent reminders of heroic achievement and cosmic justice provided inspiration for all future generations, while ensuring that the principles they had established through their victory over the Lords of Death would continue to influence human behavior and divine mortal relationships throughout all subsequent history. The stage was now set for the gods' final and successful attempt at creating humanity. Beings made from maize, the sacred plant that would provide not just physical nourishment, but the spiritual substance necessary for consciousness, gratitude, and authentic relationship with the divine forces that had labored so long to find worthy partners in their ongoing work of maintaining cosmic order. The creation of true humanity, with cosmic order restored through the Hero Twins' victory over the arbitrary powers of death and destruction, the gods could finally turn their attention to the ultimate challenge that had eluded their previous attempts. Creating human beings who possessed not just physical capabilities but the spiritual substance necessary for genuine consciousness, authentic gratitude, and meaningful relationship with the divine forces that sought partners rather than mere subjects in their ongoing work of maintaining universal harmony. The choice of maize as the material for this final and successful human creation was not arbitrary but reflected deep understanding of the relationship between physical nourishment and spiritual development that characterized Mayan cosmology at its most sophisticated level. Maize was not just food, but the sacred plant that embodied the cycle of death and renewal, the cooperation between human effort and divine blessing, and the transformation of potential into actuality that defined all successful creation. But the gods' approach to this fourth attempt at human creation demonstrated everything they had learned from their previous failures and their observation of the heroic qualities displayed by the Hero Twins in their victory over the forces that sought to prevent authentic human-divine partnership from developing successfully. The preparation of the maize that would become human flesh required careful collaboration between sovereign plumed serpent and the grandmother goddesses Xmucain and Expiacock, who ground the sacred kernels into flour that contained not just nutritional value, but the spiritual essence necessary for supporting consciousness, emotion, and the capacity for meaningful choice between good and evil actions. The yellow and white maize that provided the raw material for human creation had been hidden in the sacred mountain called Split Place, protected by supernatural guardians until the time was right for its use in the most important creative act in the history of the universe. The acquisition of this precious material required not theft or conquest, but negotiation and proper relationship with the forces that controlled access to the resources necessary for successful creation. The mixing of maize flour with water to create human flesh represented a perfect balance between durability and flexibility, strength and sensitivity, independence and interdependence that had been missing from all previous attempts at human creation. Unlike mud, which dissolved under stress, or wood, which lacked spiritual substance, maize provided the ideal material for beings intended to serve as conscious partners in maintaining cosmic order. But the most crucial element in this final creation was the gods' decision to limit their new humans' capabilities in ways that would prevent the problems that had nearly derailed their entire creative project during earlier phases of development. The first maize people possessed such perfect knowledge and understanding that they threatened to rival their creators in wisdom and power, creating the possibility that human beings might become competitors rather than partners in divine work. They know everything, the gods observed with growing concern as they watched their perfectly created humans demonstrate understanding that approached divine levels. They can see everything, understand everything, accomplish everything. If we allow them to continue developing along these lines, they will become our equals rather than our partners, our competitors rather than our collaborators in the work of maintaining cosmic order. Here's something profound about this moment that speaks to creative challenges we all face. Sometimes our successes create new problems that require careful adjustment rather than complete starting over. Whether you're raising children, managing organizations, or developing any kind of relationship, there are times when giving someone too much power or knowledge too quickly can undermine the very goals you're trying to achieve. The gods' decision to limit human capabilities while preserving human consciousness offers a model for how to maintain healthy relationships without creating unnecessary competition or resentment. How do you think leaders can empower others without creating conflicts or losing their ability to provide necessary guidance? The solution the gods implemented: breathing mist across the humans' eyes to limit their vision and understanding while preserving their essential consciousness and spiritual capabilities, represented the perfect balance between human independence and divine authority that would enable authentic partnership without destructive competition. This limitation was not punishment or arbitrary restriction, but wise recognition that meaningful relationship requires appropriate boundaries. That partnership works best when each party has distinct roles and capabilities, and that consciousness is more valuable when it operates within proper constraints than when it possesses unlimited power without corresponding wisdom or responsibility. The four first humans, Jaguar Quetzal, Jaguar Knight, Mahukuta, and True Jaguar, embodied the perfect balance of human and divine qualities that the gods had sought throughout their long creative process. They possessed sufficient intelligence to understand their role in cosmic order, adequate spiritual development to maintain proper relationship with divine forces, and appropriate physical capabilities to build civilizations and raise families, while remaining dependent upon divine blessing for their ultimate welfare and continued existence. The creation of their wives, red sea turtle, prawn house, hummingbird house, and macaw house, completed the establishment of humanity as a species capable of reproduction, cultural development, and the kind of multi-generational continuity that would enable them to serve as reliable partners in maintaining cosmic order across time, rather than merely temporary experiments in divine creativity. The first humans' response to their creation demonstrated exactly the qualities the gods had sought throughout their long process of experimentation and refinement. They offered gratitude for their existence, acknowledged their dependence upon divine blessing, and accepted their role as conscious participants in maintaining the balance between all opposing forces that shaped reality. Their prayer of thanksgiving became the model for all future human-divine relationship. Truly now, double thanks, triple thanks that we've been formed. We've been given our mouths, our faces. We speak, we listen, we wonder, we move. Our knowledge is good. We've understood what is far and near, and we've seen what is great and small under the sky, on the earth. Thanks to you, we've been formed, we've come to be made and modeled, our grandmother, our grandfather. This expression of conscious gratitude represented the fulfillment of everything the gods had hoped to achieve through their creative efforts. Beings capable of recognizing divine blessing, understanding their place in cosmic order, and participating actively in maintaining the relationships that kept the universe functioning harmoniously. The establishment of the first cities, the development of agriculture, the creation of artistic and cultural traditions, and the establishment of religious practices that maintained proper relationship between human and divine realms all flowed naturally from this successful creation of beings who combined physical capability with spiritual awareness and individual consciousness with community responsibility. But the story was not complete with the successful creation of humanity for the cosmic order that now existed, with reformed death, victorious life, and conscious human beings serving as partners in divine work, required ongoing maintenance and periodic renewal that would test each generation's commitment to the principles that the Hero Twins had established through their victory over the forces of chaos and arbitrary destruction. The Popol Vuh's conclusion emphasized that this sacred story was not merely historical record, but living instruction for all future generations who would need to understand their role in cosmic order and their responsibility to maintain the balance between opposing forces that shaped their existence and determined their ultimate destiny. The sacred book's eternal message. The Popol Vuh's conclusion emphasizes that this sacred narrative represents far more than ancient history or mythological entertainment. It serves as a perpetual instruction manual for understanding human purpose, cosmic responsibility, and the ongoing relationship between mortal consciousness and the divine forces that continue to shape reality through their collaborative work with worthy human partners. The text explicitly states that it was written amid the preaching of God in Christendom now, acknowledging the historical reality that this ancient wisdom was being preserved and transmitted during a time of cultural collision and religious transformation, when indigenous Mayan understanding had to find ways to survive and remain relevant within entirely new contexts and frameworks. But rather than presenting this cultural transition as a defeat or contamination of pure indigenous tradition, the Popol Vuh demonstrates the sophisticated adaptability that has enabled profound wisdom to survive across centuries and maintain its relevance for audiences operating within completely different religious, social, and technological circumstances than those that originally produced and preserved these stories. The sacred book's framers understood that truth transcends the specific cultural containers that hold it. That wisdom about human nature and cosmic order remains valid regardless of the particular religious or philosophical systems within which it operates, and that the most important lessons about consciousness, heroism, and divine mortal partnership could be communicated effectively to readers who approached them from entirely different starting assumptions about the nature of reality. This sophisticated approach to cultural preservation and transmission offers a model for how traditional wisdom can maintain its essential power while adapting to changing circumstances, how ancient insights can remain relevant without being frozen in obsolete forms, and how the deepest truths about human existence can be communicated across cultural and temporal boundaries that might seem to separate different peoples and eras completely. The Popol Vuh's emphasis on creation as an ongoing process rather than a completed event reflects its understanding that maintaining cosmic order requires constant attention, periodic renewal, and the active participation of conscious beings who understand their role in preserving the balance between opposing forces that could easily slip into destructive chaos if left unattended by those capable of conscious choice and deliberate action. Each generation faces its own version of the challenges that confronted the Hero Twins in their descent into Xibalba. Not literal lords of death demanding victory in supernatural ball games, but forces of despair, meaninglessness, arbitrary power, and spiritual emptiness that threatened to reduce human existence to mere survival rather than conscious participation in maintaining cosmic harmony and justice. The specific monsters may change from age to age, but the fundamental conflict between consciousness and oblivion, between meaningful existence and arbitrary destruction, between communities that serve the common good and systems that serve only the interests of those who hold power within them, remains constant across all historical periods and cultural contexts. Here's what I think makes the Popol Vuh so eternally relevant and applicable to every culture and time period. It shows us that the work of creation never ends, that each generation must take responsibility for maintaining and improving the world they inherit, and that true heroism consists not of individual glory, but of conscious partnership with forces larger than ourselves in service of principles that benefit everyone, rather than just the strong or lucky few. Whether we're dealing with environmental destruction, social injustice, technological disruption, or any other challenge that threatens human welfare and spiritual development, the same principles apply. What do you think are the most important lessons from this ancient story that could help us address the challenges we face in our modern world? The Hero Twins example demonstrates that effective heroism requires not just individual courage or supernatural abilities, but the kind of partnership, mutual support, and collaborative problem-solving that enables people to accomplish together what none of them could achieve alone, regardless of their personal talents or determination. Their victory over the Lords of Death was accomplished not through superior violence or individual dominance, but through superior wisdom, creative strategy, and willingness to sacrifice temporary advantages in service of long-term principles that would benefit all conscious beings, rather than merely advancing their own interests or satisfying their desire for revenge against those who had harmed their family. The transformation they achieved in cosmic order, reforming death rather than eliminating it, establishing justice rather than imposing arbitrary control, creating partnerships rather than demanding subjugation, provides a template for how to address systemic problems in ways that create lasting positive change, rather than merely replacing one form of oppression with another. The successful creation of humanity from maize demonstrates the importance of finding materials and methods that can support the kind of consciousness and spiritual development that makes authentic relationship possible. Whether we're talking about raising children, building communities, developing institutions, or pursuing any other creative endeavor that requires balancing multiple complex requirements simultaneously. Most importantly, the Popol Vuh reminds us that meaning comes not from individual achievement or personal satisfaction, but from conscious participation in maintaining the relationships and principles that enable life, consciousness, and spiritual development to flourish for everyone, rather than just those fortunate enough to possess superior power, intelligence, or circumstances. The sacred book's preservation across centuries of cultural disruption and transformation testifies to its recognition that certain truths about human nature and cosmic order transcend the specific circumstances within which they are discovered and expressed. That wisdom about consciousness, heroism, and divine mortal partnership remains relevant regardless of changes in technology, politics, or religious frameworks. As we face our own challenges in maintaining meaningful existence within rapidly changing circumstances, as we confront our own versions of the forces that seek to reduce human life to mere survival rather than conscious participation in cosmic order, as we work to establish relationships and institutions that serve principles larger than individual ambition or narrow group interests, The Popol Vuh offers both inspiration and practical guidance for how to proceed with wisdom, courage, and hope. The Hero Twins' legacy lives on in every person who chooses partnership over domination, who seeks to reform rather than destroy necessary institutions, who accepts the responsibilities that come with consciousness and ability, and who understands that true victory consists not of defeating enemies, but of establishing principles that enable all conscious beings to flourish according to their highest potential. In the end, the Popol Vuh teaches us that we are all participants in the ongoing work of creation, that the gods' search for worthy partners continues in every generation, and that the choice between chaos and order, between meaningful existence and arbitrary destruction, between consciousness and oblivion, remains ours to make through our daily decisions and our commitment to principles that serve something larger than our immediate comfort or personal advantage. The sacred story concludes not with the end, but with an invitation to continue the work that the Hero Twins began, to serve as conscious partners in maintaining cosmic order, and to demonstrate through our own lives and choices that humanity was indeed worthy of the gods' long effort to create beings capable of authentic heroism, genuine wisdom, and meaningful partnership in the eternal work of keeping light triumphant over darkness, hope victorious over despair, and consciousness ascendant over the forces that would reduce existence to mere mechanical repetition without spiritual significance or transformative possibility. The age of heroes continues with each person who accepts the invitation to conscious participation in cosmic order. The choice, as always, is ours to make. Thank you for joining this journey through one of humanity's most sophisticated creation stories and heroic adventures. The Popol Vuh shows us that heroism is not about individual glory, but about conscious partnership in maintaining cosmic order, that creation is an ongoing process requiring active participation from every generation, and that true wisdom comes from understanding our role in something larger than ourselves. Like and subscribe if you want to explore more timeless stories that reveal the deepest truths about human nature and our place in the cosmic order. And remember, the Hero Twins example lives on in every person who chooses cooperation over competition, reform over destruction, and service to principles larger than personal advantage. Your own heroic journey is waiting. The question is, will you accept the gods' invitation to conscious partnership in the ongoing work of creation?